My wife started working late every night. Then I discovered the real reason. For almost a year, my wife came home late every single night. At first, I believed her excuses: extra meetings, new responsibilities, staff shortages, deadlines, the usual things. But eventually, the excuses stopped making sense. The late nights became later, the phone became locked. The distance between us grew bigger every week. And then one night, I saw a message on her screen. Just one message, but it was enough to make me think my marriage was over. What I discovered afterward completely changed the way I looked at my wife. And honestly, I've never forgiven myself for what I assumed. My name is Mark. I'm 40 years old. I've been married to my wife, Emily, for 13 years. If you had asked me before all of this happened, I would have told you we had a great marriage. Not perfect, no marriage is, but solid. We trusted each other and communicated well, supported each other through difficult times. Emily was the kind of person everyone loved: kind, patient, reliable. The person who remembered birthdays, who helped friends move, who stayed late at work to help coworkers. Sometimes I joked that she cared more about other people than herself. She would laugh and tell me someone had to. For years, our life was simple, comfortable, predictable, and I was happy. Then things started changing, slowly at first, so slowly that I almost didn't notice. It started with occasional overtime, a few nights each month, then a few nights each week. Eventually, it became almost every day. Emily worked as a hospital administrator. Healthcare can be demanding, so initially, I wasn't concerned. But after several months, the pattern became impossible to ignore. She left earlier, came home later, looked exhausted constantly. Whenever I asked about work, her answers became shorter, more vague. One evening, I asked if everything was okay. She smiled, the same smile she'd always used when she didn't want me to worry, and said, "Just busy." I wanted to believe her, so I did, at least for a while. The problem wasn't just the overtime. It was everything else, little things, the kind of things people notice but try to ignore. Her phone suddenly had a password. For years, she'd never cared. Now, she never left it unattended. She started texting more frequently, smiling at messages, then quickly locking her screen whenever I entered the room. Our conversations became shorter, date nights disappeared, weekend plans vanished. I told myself there were reasonable explanations: stress, work pressure, burnout. But deep down, another possibility had started forming, one I didn't want to consider. One Friday night, Emily fell asleep on the couch. It was after midnight. She looked completely exhausted. Her phone buzzed beside her. I wasn't trying to snoop, at least that's what I tell myself. But the screen lit up, and I saw part of the message. It said, "Thank you for everything. I don't know what I would have done without you." My stomach dropped. Immediately, my mind went somewhere dark. Who sends messages like that? At midnight? To a married woman? I picked up the phone. The screen locked before I could read more. For the first time in 13 years, I genuinely wondered if my wife was having an affair. I barely slept that night. After that, everything looked suspicious. Every late night, every phone notification, every unexplained absence. I started noticing details I'd previously ignored. She seemed distracted during dinner, sometimes emotional for no obvious reason. Sometimes she'd sit quietly and stare into space. I convinced myself these were signs, evidence, proof. The truth is, once suspicion enters your mind, everything starts looking guilty. I didn't realize that at the time. I thought I was being observant. In reality, I was building a story with incomplete information, and the more I watched, the more convinced I became. One evening, I made a decision I'm not proud of. I followed her. She left work around 6. Instead of driving home, she went somewhere else. My heart was pounding. I stayed several cars behind, trying not to be noticed. Eventually, she parked near a small building on the edge of town. It wasn't a restaurant. It wasn't a hotel. It wasn't another office. It was a medical facility. I sat there confused. Then I watched her enter and remain inside for nearly 3 hours. When she finally left, she looked emotionally drained. Not happy, not excited, just exhausted. The affair theory suddenly seemed less certain, but I still didn't know the truth. A few weeks later, everything exploded. Emily missed our anniversary dinner. Not by an hour, by 4 hours. I sat alone in the restaurant, watching couples celebrate around me. Embarrassed, angry, hurt. When she finally arrived home, I lost my temper. Years of frustration came pouring out. The late nights, the distance, the secrecy, the phone, the messages, everything. For the first time in our marriage, I directly asked, "Is there someone else?" The look on her face is something I'll never forget. She looked shocked, then hurt, then devastated. And for several seconds, she couldn't speak. Then Emily started crying, not defensive crying, not guilty crying, heartbroken crying, the kind of crying that comes from carrying something heavy for too long. Eventually, she walked into the bedroom, returned with a folder, and placed it on the table. Inside were medical records, bills, appointment schedules, treatment plans. I stared at them confused. Then I saw a familiar name, my mother's. Suddenly, nothing made sense. My mother had been dealing with health issues, but she'd always claimed everything was under control. Apparently, it wasn't. Not even close. Over the previous year, my mother's condition had become much worse, far worse than she'd admitted. She was terrified of becoming a burden, so she hid it from me, from everyone, except Emily. My wife had discovered the truth during a routine conversation, and instead of telling me, she chose to help. Quietly, privately. The late nights weren't dates. They were hospital visits, medical appointments, insurance meetings, care planning sessions. The messages weren't romantic. They were from doctors, nurses, care coordinators, and my mother. The facility I'd followed her to? A treatment center, not a secret relationship, a medical one. I asked the obvious question, "Why didn't you tell me?" Emily looked exhausted. Then she explained. My mother made her promise. She didn't want me distracted. At the time, I was managing a major project at work, working long hours. Under enormous pressure, my mother didn't want me worrying. Emily thought she was protecting me, helping both of us. At first, she intended to tell me eventually, but 1 week became 1 month. 1 month became 6, and suddenly she was carrying everything alone. I felt sick, not because of what Emily had done, because of what I had assumed. For months, I'd built a story in my head, a story where she was betraying me, lying to me, cheating on me. Meanwhile, she was spending her nights helping my family, sacrificing her own time, her own energy, her own happiness, and doing it without asking for recognition. I thought back to every suspicious thought, every accusation, every moment of doubt, and I hated myself for it. My mother eventually recovered enough to regain her independence. Not completely, but enough. Emily and I worked through what happened, the secrecy, the misunderstandings, the trust issues. It wasn't easy, but we made it. Today, when people ask me the most important lesson I've learned about relationships, my answer is simple. Assumptions are dangerous. Because once you decide what the truth is, you stop looking for the actual truth. And sometimes, the person you think is hurting you is actually sacrificing more for you than you'll ever know. Final question for viewers. If you were in my position, would you have assumed the same thing? Or would you have trusted your partner until you knew the full story?